Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something real today. Something that might make you uncomfortable at first, but growth usually does. Every man wants you to detach, not because he doesn't care, but because attachment without balance kills desire. See, when you hold on too tight, you squeeze the life out of attraction. You start explaining yourself too much, proving too much, loving from a place of fear instead of strength. Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk to you about detachment because most people misunderstand it completely. Detachment is not coldness. It's not punishment. It's not pretending you don't care when you really do. Detachment is control. It's emotional discipline. It's knowing who you are without needing someone else to constantly remind you. And here's the truth nobody likes to hear. The more attached you become to someone's attention, validation, and reassurance, the less attractive you start to feel to them. See, attachment comes from fear. Fear of losing, fear of being alone, fear that if you stop trying, stop checking, stop reaching out, everything will fall apart. And when fear drives your actions, you start shrinking. You start adjusting your personality, your standards, your boundaries just to keep someone comfortable. You answer messages faster than you should. You explain things that don't need explaining. You tolerate behavior you never would have accepted before. And slowly, without realizing it, you hand over your power. Detachment is what happens when you say, I care, but I won't abandon myself to prove it. It's when you stop needing constant reassurance and start trusting your own worth. When you detach, you don't react emotionally to every shift in behavior. You don't panic when the energy changes. You observe, you breathe, you stay grounded. And that calm right there, that calm is magnetic. Men don't chase chaos. They chase clarity. They chase confidence. They chase women who feel whole, not women who feel like they're waiting to be completed. When you're overly attached, everything feels urgent. Every delay feels personal. Every silence feels like rejection. But when you detach, you understand something powerful. What's meant for you doesn't need to be chased. Detachment changes the dynamic because it removes pressure. Pressure kills attraction faster than anything else. Pressure says, you owe me. Detachment says, I'm good either way. And when someone realizes you're not holding on to them for survival, they start leaning in out of desire. They feel the difference. Energy never lies. When you stop overgiving, when you stop proving, when you stop bending just to be chosen, you send a silent message, I value myself. And value creates respect. Respect creates interest. Interest creates pursuit. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to threaten to leave. Detachment speaks without words. A lot of people think if they pull back, they'll lose the person, but what they don't realize is this. If someone only stays because you were chasing, explaining, and overextending, you already lost them. Detachment doesn't push away the right person. It exposes the wrong one. And exposure is protection. When you detach, you stop reacting emotionally to inconsistency. You stop asking why effort changed. You stop demanding clarity from confusion. You let people show you who they are through their actions, and that's when you stop getting disappointed because your expectations are no longer built on hope, but on reality. There is something incredibly powerful about a woman who doesn't panic when things get quiet, a woman who doesn't rush to fix, force, or figure everything out, a woman who trusts that what belongs to her will show up without her chasing it down. That energy makes a man pause. It makes him think. It makes him feel the space you left behind. Detachment teaches you patience, not waiting patience, but self-respecting patience. The kind that says, I'm not in a hurry to give my heart to someone who hasn't earned access to it. And when you move like that, you stop settling for potential. You stop falling in love with promises. You stop confusing attention with intention. When you're detached, you don't argue for your worth. You don't beg to be prioritized. You don't fight for basic effort. You simply adjust your availability. You redirect your energy. You focus back on your life, your goals, your peace. And suddenly, you become less accessible, not because you're playing games, but because you're busy being aligned. Men chase what feels valuable, and value is never desperate. Value is calm. Value is selective. Value doesn't rush. When you detach, you move from being emotionally reactive to emotionally secure. And security is attractive because it feels safe, steady, and rare. Detachment also protects your heart. It keeps you from overinvesting too early. It helps you love without losing yourself. You can still care deeply, but you don't collapse when things don't go your way. You don't abandon your standards just to keep someone interested. You stay centered. The moment you stop needing someone to choose you, you become someone worth choosing. Because now being with you is a want, not a requirement. And that shift changes everything. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something most people never really understand until life teaches them the hard way. Men don't chase what is always available. They chase what feels valuable. And value is not created by doing more, giving more, or sacrificing more of yourself. Value is created by how you carry yourself, how you respect your time, and how you protect your energy. See, availability sends a message, even when you don't say a word. When you're always there, always responding, always adjusting your schedule, always waiting. It quietly tells someone, my life can pause for you. And here's the uncomfortable truth. When something can be paused, delayed, or taken for granted, it usually is. Not because the man is bad, but because human nature responds to perceived worth. Value works differently. Value doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg to be seen. Value is felt. It's the calm confidence of someone who has a full life, clear priorities, and standards they don't negotiate. When a man senses that your time is meaningful, that your attention is earned, something shifts in him. He starts leaning in, not because you demanded it, but because he feels it slipping out of reach. Many people think chasing creates closeness, but chasing actually creates imbalance. One person runs, the other relaxes. One person invests emotionally, the other consumes. And the more one side overinvests, the more the other side subconsciously devalues what's being handed to them freely. Effort that costs nothing is rarely appreciated. Men chase what makes them feel like they've earned a place. When you don't give immediate access to your emotions, your body, your time, your energy, you create intrigue. You create curiosity. You create something to move toward. And that pursuit activates respect. Respect is the foundation of attraction, not attention. Availability says, I'm here whenever you want. Value says, I'm here when it makes sense. And there is a big difference between those two energies. One feels desperate. The other feels grounded. One feels predictable. The other feels intentional. A lot of people confuse being loving, with being overavailable. They think that if they show up more, love harder, forgive faster, everything will work out. But love without boundaries becomes invisible. When everything is given up front, there's nothing left to earn, nothing left to grow into. When you start valuing your own time, other people feel it. When you stop rearranging your life to fit someone who hasn't committed to you, your presence becomes rarer, and rarity increases desire. This isn't manipulation, it's self-respect. Men are drawn to women who look like they don't need rescuing, women who seem comfortable in their own company, women whose happiness doesn't collapse when plans change or texts slow down. That independence signals strength, and strength is attractive. When you're always available, you unintentionally teach someone how little effort is required to keep you. But when you're selective, when you don't drop everything instantly, when you continue living your life fully, you teach them that access to you is earned, not guaranteed. Value also shows up in silence, not the silent treatment, but peaceful silence. The kind where you don't chase explanations, you don't overtext, you don't push for reassurance, you allow space. And in that space, a man starts thinking. He starts wondering where you are, what you're doing, why you're not reacting the way he expected. That curiosity pulls him closer. The problem is many people are afraid of losing someone, so they give them everything. But giving everything too soon removes the mystery. It removes the pursuit. And without pursuit, attraction slowly fades. Men want to feel like choosing you is a decision, not an obligation. When you're OV, early available, the relationship feels heavy. When you're valuable, it feels exciting. There's anticipation, there's momentum. Value also comes from standards. When you don't tolerate inconsistency, when you don't excuse disrespect, when you don't explain why you deserve effort, you simply move accordingly. And that movement speaks louder than words ever could. You don't need to threaten to leave. You don't need ultimatums. You don't need speeches. Your absence, your reduced availability, your redirected energy does all the talking for you. And the right man hears it clearly. Men chase what they feel they could lose, not because they're scared, but because loss creates clarity. When your presence is no longer guaranteed, effort increases. Attention sharpens, priority becomes real. Value is also internal. It's how you see yourself. When you believe your time matters, others treat it that way. When you believe your love is precious, others become careful with it. When you stop trying to be chosen, you become the prize. Availability without value leads to being taken for granted. Value without chasing leads to being pursued. And once you understand that difference, your entire relationship dynamic changes. Ladies and gentlemen, let me break this down in a way that's real and honest, because this right here changes everything. The moment you stop needing validation is the moment your confidence truly shows up. And confidence is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg to be seen. Confidence is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted. And that kind of confidence is what people feel before you ever say a word. See, validation is addictive. When you rely on someone else to tell you that you're enough, attractive, worthy, or loved, you give them control over how you feel about yourself. Their attention becomes your fuel. Their absence becomes your anxiety. Their approval becomes your peace. And when someone realizes they have that kind of power over you, the dynamic shifts, not always consciously, but energetically. When you constantly look for validation, you start performing instead of being. You say things you don't mean just to keep harmony. You laugh at things that don't feel funny. You ignore red flags because you don't want to risk losing approval. And slowly, you drift away from who you really are. That's not confidence. That's survival mode. True confidence begins when you no longer need someone to choose you in order to feel chosen. When you can sit in silence without overthinking. When you don't panic if a message goes unanswered. When your self-worth doesn't rise and fall based on attention. That's when your presence changes. That's when people feel something different about you. Men are naturally drawn to women who seem emotionally secure, not because they're cold, but because they're stable. Secure energy feels safe. It feels grounded. It feels rare. A woman who doesn't need constant reassurance sends a powerful message. I know who I am, and knowing who you are is magnetic. When you stop seeking validation, you stop over-explaining. You stop justifying your feelings. You stop chasing clarity from confusion. You trust your instincts. You trust your boundaries. And that trust shows. Your words become fewer but stronger. Your reactions become calmer but more intentional. Confidence grows when you stop outsourcing what our worth. When you stop asking, am I enough for him? And start asking, is this right for me? Shift puts you back in the driver's seat. You're no longer auditioning. You're evaluating. Men chase what feels solid, what feels centered, what feels like it doesn't need saving. When a man senses that your happiness doesn't depend on his behavior, something changes in him. He starts stepping up, not because you demanded it, but because he wants to be part of your world, not the center of it. Validation seeking creates pressure. Pressure to respond quickly. Pressure to always be pleasant. Pressure to never upset the balance. But confidence releases pressure. It allows space, and space gives room for desire to grow. A confident woman doesn't rush intimacy. She doesn't rush attachment. She lets things unfold naturally. She understands that what's meant for her won't require constant reassurance. And because she's not chasing validation, she notices behavior more clearly. She sees effort. She sees consistency. She sees intention. When you don't need validation, you don't take things personally. You don't spiral over small changes. You don't assume silence means rejection. You understand that other people's actions reflect where they are, not your worth. That emotional stability is powerful. Confidence also means you can walk away without drama, not because you don't care, but because you care enough about yourself to protect your peace. You don't argue to be valued. You don't beg to be prioritized. You simply adjust your presence. And that calm withdrawal often speaks louder than any emotional reaction ever could. Men notice when a woman doesn't need to be chased to feel secure. They notice when she doesn't fish for compliments. They notice when she doesn't call a PSE emotionally during uncertainty. That level of self-trust creates respect. And respect is the gateway to attraction. When you stop needing validation, you stop giving away your power. You stop being reactive. You become intentional. You become selective. And selectiveness signals value. It says, not everyone gets access to me. And that exclusivity is attractive. Confidence doesn't mean you never feel doubt. It means doubt doesn't control you. It means you feel your emotions without letting them dictate your behavior. You can care deeply without clinging. You can love without losing yourself. You can desire without desperation. And here's the truth most people avoid: when you stop seeking validation, some people will pull away, not because you changed for the worse, but because they benefited from your insecurity. And that's okay. Let them go. Confidence clears space for alignment. The moment you become emotionally self-sufficient, relationships stop feeling like survival and start feeling like choice. And when love becomes a choice instead of a need, it becomes stronger, healthier, and more attractive. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you why space is so powerful, because most people are terrified of it. They think space means distance, loss, or the beginning of the end. But space doesn't ruin real connections. Space reveals them. When you stop filling every gap, fixing every silence, and forcing every conversation, you allow the truth to rise to the surface. See, when you are always present, always available, always initiating, you become the engine of the connection. You keep it alive with effort, emotion, and energy. And as long as you're doing that, you never really know if the other person is choosing you or just enjoying the ride. Space removes your effort from the equation, and what remains is intention. When you pull back, not out of anger, but out of self-respect, people show you who they really are. Someone who values you will feel the shift. They will step forward. They will check in. They will close the distance. Someone who was only comfortable with your constant presence will fade, stall, or disappear. And that information is priceless. Most people don't lose relationships because they create space. They lose relationships because they were carrying them alone. Space simply exposes that imbalance. And exposure is not punishment, it's clarity. When you stop over-communicating, you stop controlling the outcome. You allow the connection to breathe, and breathing is necessary for anything to stay alive. Without space, attraction suffocates, desire fades, respect erodes. But with space, curiosity grows. Intention becomes visible. Men, especially, respond to space in a way many don't expect. When a woman stops pushing, stops asking, stops explaining, it creates a moment of reflection. He starts asking himself questions. He starts noticing your absence. He starts realizing the role you played in his emotional world. Space invites thought, and thought invites pursuit. But here's the part that takes strength. You have to be willing to accept what space reveals, because sometimes it shows you that the person was only present because you were overgiving. Sometimes it shows you that the effort was never equal, and that can hurt. But staying in the dark hurts longer. Space also protects your dignity. It keeps you from chasing answers that actions already gave you. It keeps you from begging for consistency. It keeps you from explaining your needs to someone who keeps showing you they're not listening. When you step back, you stop negotiating your worth. A lot of people fear that if they stop trying, everything will fall apart. But if something collapses when you stop forcing it, it was never stable to begin with. Real interest doesn't need constant reminders. Real connection doesn't disappear because you pause. Space shifts the power dynamic, not in a manipulative way, but in a healthy one. It moves you from emotional laborer to equal participant. You're no longer carrying the weight alone. You're allowing the other person to either show up or step out. And when someone steps out, that's not rejection, that's redirection. Space saves you time, it saves you energy, it saves you from investing deeper into something that was never aligned. Space also reconnects you with yourself. When you stop focusing on managing someone else's emotions, you start hearing your own. You remember what you enjoy, what you need, what you deserve. You stop shrinking to fit someone else's comfort and start expanding back into your own life. Men respect women who don't hover, who don't monitor, who don't panic at distance, because that calm signals strength. It says, I trust myself enough to let things unfold, and that trust is rare. Space is not about disappearing. It's about not overextending. It's about letting silence do what words cannot. Silence creates contrast. It allows absence to be felt. And when your absence is felt, your presence becomes valuable again. Some people only realize what you mean and to them when you stop being easily accessible. Not because they're cruel, but because humans often understand value through contrast. Space creates that contrast. When you create space, you also stop betraying yourself. You stop staying in situations where you feel anxious, uncertain, or undervalued just to keep someone around. You choose peace over panic, clarity over confusion. And here's the most important part. Space gives you your power back, not power over someone else, but power over yourself, your emotions, your reactions, your standards. You stop reacting to every shift and start responding with intention. When space reveals someone's lack of effort, you don't argue, you don't confront, you don't chase closure, you accept the information and move accordingly. That calm acceptance is strength. The right man won't be scared off by space. He'll be drawn in by it. He'll see it as confidence, not distance. He'll step forward without being pushed. And if he doesn't, then space did his job. It showed you the truth before you gave more than you should have. Space doesn't break connections, it filters them. It separates interest from convenience, intention from attention, and love from attachment. And once you understand that, you stop fearing space and start using it wisely.